At my grandson's graduation dinner, he raised his glass and said, "To the woman who taught me what failure looks like." I drank in silence. Weeks later, he received a letter from my lawyer and started begging for my forgiveness. The restaurant buzzed with celebration. White tablecloths, crystal glasses reflecting the warm light of chandeliers, and the constant murmur of proud families celebrating their graduates. My grandson Alex stood tall in his graduation regalia, the bright blue of his medical school honor, cords striking against the black gown. Everyone looked at him with such admiration. I sat quietly at the corner of the table, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Despite the warmth in the room, I felt a chill creeping up my spine. Something in Alex's expression as he glanced my way made me uneasy. I'd seen that look before. The same cold calculation I'd noticed more frequently over the past few years. A gradual hardening I couldn't quite understand. "I'd like to make a toast," Alex announced, his voice commanding immediate attention. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. The chatter died down as everyone raised their glasses. My heart swelled with pride despite everything. He had done it, graduated top of his class from medical school, the career I had once pursued and given up. "First, to my friends and colleagues who pushed me to excellence," he began, nodding to the table where his classmates sat. "To my mentors at Georgetown who saw my potential." I smiled, taking a small sip of my champagne. This was what all the sacrifices had been for. This moment of triumph. "And to my Aunt Caroline," he continued, raising his glass toward my late daughter-in-law's sister, who sat across from me wearing an expensive navy dress and a smug smile. "You've been my true family these past years, showing me what success and ambition really look like." Caroline nodded, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the light. I tightened my grip on the stem of my glass, trying to keep my expression neutral. "And finally," Alex said, his voice changing slightly as he turned toward me, "to my grandmother, Virginia." A moment of silence fell as everyone turned to look at me. I straightened my shoulders, waiting for the customary acknowledgement of my role in his life. After all, I had raised him since he was 7, when my son David and his wife Elizabeth died in that terrible accident. I had been the one who packed his lunches, helped with science projects, sat through every parent-teacher conference, and worked extra hours to afford his private school tuition. Alex's smile didn't reach his eyes as he continued. "To the woman who taught me what failure looks like." The words hit me like a physical blow. I froze, my glass halfway to my lips. "To giving up a medical career to become just a grandmother," he continued, his voice taking on a mocking edge that silenced the entire table. "To showing me exactly what I never wanted to become." Caroline's smirk widened as shocked murmurs rippled through the gathering. My hand trembled slightly, but I forced myself to remain composed. Decades of practice at hiding pain served me well in that moment. "To mediocrity," Alex finished, taking a long sip from his glass. I looked around the table. Some guests stared at their plates in discomfort. Others glanced at me with pity. Caroline was barely containing her satisfaction. No one spoke up. No one defended me. With deliberate calm, I raised my glass to my lips and drank in silence. The champagne tasted like vinegar, but I swallowed it without changing my expression. 70 years of life had taught me that dignity often lies in silence. The dinner continued, conversation gradually resuming around me. I sat through 3 courses, responding politely when spoken to, cutting my salmon into perfect small bites I couldn't taste. All while the words echoed in my head. "The woman who taught me what failure looks like." I excused myself early, claiming fatigue. No one seemed particularly concerned when I called a taxi instead of waiting for Alex, who had promised to drive me home. As the taxi pulled away from the restaurant, I watched through the rear window as the celebration continued without me. I could see Alex through the window, laughing with Caroline, not even noticing I had left. The taxi driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Big celebration back there?" "My grandson's medical school graduation," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Ah, a doctor. You must be proud." I turned to look out the window at the passing streetlights, each one blurring into a streak of gold against the night. "Yes," I said quietly. "He's become exactly who he wanted to be." When I arrived home, I walked through the familiar rooms of the small house I'd downsized to after selling my home to help pay for Alex's undergraduate education. Photos of him lined the hallway, Alex as a gap-toothed second grader holding his science fair ribbon, Alex in his high school graduation cap, Alex in his white coat ceremony. In each one, I stood beside him, my smile genuine, my eyes filled with hope. I stopped at the last photo, taken just a year ago. His arm was around my shoulders, but there was already a distance in his eyes I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. How long had he been looking at me that way? When had my grandson, the little boy who once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, who cried in my arms when the other children teased him about being an orphan, begun to see me as a failure? I carefully removed each photo from the wall, placing them face down in a drawer. Then I went to my small home office and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside was a folder labeled Contingencies that I had prepared years ago but never expected to use. Inside were the business cards of 3 people: my old medical school colleague turned intellectual property attorney, my financial advisor, and my former research partner at Johns Hopkins. I hadn't spoken to any of them in years, having gradually lost touch as Alex's needs consumed more and more of my life. I picked up the phone and dialed the first number. It was late, but I knew Gerald always worked into the night. "Virginia Winters," I said when he answered, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. "It's been a long time. I need your help with something important." As I outlined what I needed, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but alongside it was something else. A resolve I hadn't felt in decades. Alex had made his choice tonight. Now it was time to make mine. I couldn't sleep that night. The ceiling fan spun lazily above my bed, creating shadows that danced across the walls as I remembered the day that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday when the police officer knocked on my door. I was preparing for surgery the next morning, reviewing patient files at my dining room table. The moment I saw his face, I knew. My son David and his wife Elizabeth had been in a head-on collision. Neither survived. 7-year-old Alex was in the back seat, protected by his booster chair. He had a broken arm and was being treated for shock, but physically, he would recover. Emotionally was another matter entirely. I remember walking into the hospital room where he sat, his small arm in a cast, his eyes vacant. When he saw me, he didn't cry. He just asked, "Are they really gone, Grandma?" I held him that night as he finally broke down, his small body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for his chest. I made him a promise. "I will always be here for you, Alex. Always." 2 days later, at the memorial service, Caroline appeared. Elizabeth's sister had always been distant, too busy climbing the corporate ladder to attend family gatherings. But now she stood beside me, perfectly composed in designer black. "I'll take Alex," she announced, as if discussing a business transaction. Elizabeth would have wanted him with me. I was still in shock, but something in her tone pulled me back to reality. Alex needs stability right now. He's comfortable with me. David and Elizabeth left guardianship to me in their will. Caroline's perfectly plucked eyebrows arched. A 55-year-old widow with a demanding medical career? How exactly will that work, Virginia? Her words stung because they touched on fears I'd already been grappling with. My surgical schedule often meant 12-hour days. My research at Johns Hopkins was at a critical stage. Taking on a child would mean significant changes. The custody battle lasted 3 months. Caroline hired an aggressive attorney who questioned my ability to balance my career with raising a child. She brought up every canceled family dinner, every time I'd been late to a school event due to emergency surgeries. In the end, the judge honored David and Elizabeth's wishes, granting me full custody. But the victory felt hollow as I watched. Caroline leaned down to whisper something in Alex's ear before she left the courtroom. That night, I made the first of many sacrifices. I called the head of my department at Johns Hopkins. "I need to step back, Richard. Alex needs me now. Virginia, you're on the verge of a breakthrough with your research. The patent alone could revolutionize cardiac surgery. Can't you hire help?" "He's lost everything, Richard. I can't ask him to adjust to a nanny, too." I paused, my throat tight. "Keep my name on the research. I'll consult when I can." I sold my practice to my partner, keeping only a handful of long-term patients. I traded my elegant townhouse for a suburban home near the best school district. I became room mother, soccer mom, science fair coach, and grief counselor, all while maintaining a much-reduced medical practice that allowed me to be home when Alex returned from school. At first, Alex clung to me, his nightmares frequent. I would sit by his bed, stroking his hair until he fell back asleep. Slowly, he began to heal. He made friends, excelled in school, developed a passion for science that reminded me of my own childhood dreams. Caroline didn't disappear as I'd hoped. She sent extravagant birthday gifts, took Alex for occasional weekends, and never missed an opportunity to remind him of his mother. Not the real Elizabeth, who had struggled with depression and had once confessed to me her regrets about becoming a mother so young, but a mythical version. Brilliant, ambitious, destined for greatness. When Alex was 12, I found him staring at a photo of Elizabeth. Mom was going to be famous, wasn't she? Aunt Caroline says she was the smartest person she knew. I hesitated. The truth was complicated. Elizabeth had been bright but directionless, constantly starting projects she never finished. Your mother had many talents, I said carefully. Alex frowned. Aunt Caroline says I'm just like her, that I shouldn't waste my potential like. He stopped, but I heard the unspoken comparison. Like you. I didn't confront Caroline. Instead, I doubled down on supporting Alex. When he showed interest in medicine, I encouraged him, sharing my old textbooks, arranging for him to shadow colleagues. I liquidated my retirement investments to send him to an elite private high school when the public school wasn't challenging enough. By the time Alex was applying to colleges, Caroline's influence had grown stronger. She took him on tours of Ivy League schools, introduced him to her influential friends, and positioned herself as his mentor. I was relegated to the practical support, editing essays, managing applications, and of course, figuring out how to pay for it all. The day his acceptance letter from Princeton arrived, Alex hugged me tightly. I couldn't have done this without you, Grandma. Those moments kept me going through the lean years that followed. I sold my house and moved into the small 2-bedroom I still live in now. I took on extra telehealth consultations to help with his expenses. When Alex decided on medical school after Princeton, I liquidated the last of my assets, including my share in a small medical device company I'd helped start decades earlier. I never told Alex about these sacrifices. I wanted him to focus on his studies, not worry about me. Perhaps that was my mistake. Perhaps if he had known the cost, he might have valued it more. Or perhaps Caroline would have found another way to turn him against me. I only began to notice the change during his second year of medical school. His calls became less frequent, his visits home shorter. When he did come, he would receive texts from Caroline and disappear for hours. He began to make comments about my modest life, about how I could have been more if I'd prioritized my career. During his 3rd year, he brought home a girlfriend, the daughter of one of Caroline's friends. She looked around my small house with barely disguised disdain and asked Alex, "Didn't you say your grandmother was a doctor?" The question hung in the air, loaded with judgment. I saw something shift in Alex's eyes. Embarrassment. Perhaps even shame. She gave it up, he replied, not meeting my gaze. Gave it up. As if my choice had been a surrender rather than a sacrifice. Now lying in bed after his graduation dinner, I finally confronted the truth I'd been avoiding for years. The Alex I had raised, the sweet boy who once looked at me with adoration, was gone. In his place stood a stranger who saw me not as his devoted grandmother but as a cautionary tale. The woman who taught me what failure looks like. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I would no longer protect Alex from the truth about his mother, about Caroline, about the choices I had made. It was time for him to understand the true price of gratitude. The morning after the graduation dinner, I sat in Gerald Hoffman's office, surrounded by the evidence of his success. Awards on the walls, a view of the Baltimore harbor through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the quiet hum of a thriving legal practice. It had been nearly 15 years since I'd last seen him, but he greeted me with the same warmth I remembered. "Virginia," he said, taking my hands in his. "It's been far too long." I nodded, suddenly aware of how much I'd aged compared to my old colleague. Gerald still looked vibrant at 72, his silver hair the only concession to time. I had always admired his mind, brilliant and precise, which made him an excellent surgeon before he left medicine to pursue law. "I need your help with something delicate," I said as I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. Gerald leaned forward, his expression serious. "Whatever you need." I placed a thick file folder on his desk. "Do you remember the Winters Hoffman valve?" A slow smile spread across his face. "The cardiac valve we designed together. Of course I remember. That was brilliant work, Virginia. Ahead of its time. What happened to it after I stepped back from the research?" Gerald frowned slightly. "The project stalled without your expertise. Richard tried to move forward, but..." He shrugged. "The patent application was filed, but development was shelved. I nodded slowly. And the patent? Who owns it now? Johns Hopkins technically holds the institutional rights, but you and I are still listed as the primary inventors. It's been dormant all these years. His eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. Virginia, are you thinking of reviving the project? I took a deep breath. The valve design was primarily my work, Gerald. You know that? He nodded without hesitation. About 80% yours, yes. I was just the technical legal consultant who helped with the early patent framework. Your cardiac insights were the real breakthrough. I want to reactivate my rights to the patent and pursue development. Gerald leaned back, studying me. After all this time? What changed? I told him about Alex's toast, about Caroline's years of manipulation, about the sacrifices I'd made that had been interpreted as weakness. Gerald listened without interrupting, his expression darkening as I spoke. That ungrateful little... He began when I finished, but I held up a hand. He's been influenced since childhood. Caroline has been planting seeds for years. That doesn't excuse it, Virginia. No, I agreed. It doesn't. Gerald tapped his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. The valve design would be worth millions if developed properly. Modern materials science has caught up to your vision. The minimally invasive approach you pioneered is exactly what the market wants now, I know. And you kept all your research notes? The supplementary designs? I patted the folder I'd brought. Everything. Plus some improvements I've been quietly working on over the years. Gerald's eyebrows rose. You continued the research? I smiled faintly. In the small hours between Alex's soccer games and helping with science projects, medicine was never just a job for me, Gerald. It was a calling. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. What exactly do you want to do, Virginia? First, I want to ensure that my rights to the patent are secure and exclusive. That's straightforward enough. As the primary inventor with Johns Hopkins as the institutional assignee, we can negotiate a development agreement that gives you controlling interest. Second, I continued, I want to establish a trust for the potential proceeds with very specific terms. Gerald picked up a legal pad. What kind of terms? The majority of the proceeds will go to a foundation supporting medical research in developing countries. I want to establish a scholarship fund for single parents pursuing medical careers. I paused, and I want to remove Alex from my will and any benefits from the patent's development. Gerald looked up sharply. That's a significant step, Virginia. I'm not doing this out of vengeance, Gerald. It's about consequences. Are you sure about this? I thought about the decades of sacrifice, the nights spent holding Alex through nightmares, the meals I'd skipped to afford his extracurricular activities, the promising research I'd set aside. All that time, Caroline had been whispering in his ear, painting me as a failure, someone who had given up rather than given everything. Yes, I said firmly. I'm sure. Gerald nodded slowly. I'll draw up the paperwork. Anything else? I hesitated, then reached into my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. There's one more thing. I've kept this for years, protecting Alex from the truth. I think it's time he knew. Gerald took the envelope with a questioning look. It's a letter. Elizabeth wrote to David the week before they died. Caroline doesn't know about it. Gerald carefully set the envelope on his desk. May I ask what it contains? I closed my eyes briefly, remembering the day I found it while cleaning out their house. Elizabeth was planning to leave David. She was unhappy with motherhood, overwhelmed by the responsibilities. She wrote that she wanted to start fresh without the burden of family holding her back. Gerald's expression softened with understanding. You kept this from Alex to protect his memory of his mother. I nodded. Caroline has spent years crafting this perfect image of Elizabeth. Ambitious, brilliant, destined for greatness. The truth is much more complicated. Elizabeth was deeply troubled, frequently depressed and resentful of the constraints of motherhood. And you took on that burden without complaint. He was a child who had lost everything, Gerald. What was I supposed to do? Tell him his mother had been planning to abandon him? Gerald shook his head. You did what you thought was right. I'm not sure anymore. I sighed. Caroline has used Elizabeth's memory as a weapon against me for years. Maybe if Alex knew the truth. What do you want me to do with this letter? Include it with the legal notification about his removal from the will and patent benefits. It's time for the truth, all of it. Gerald studied me for a long moment. This will change everything, Virginia. Are you prepared for that? Was I prepared? The question echoed in my mind as I drove home from Gerald's office. For 15 years, I had structured my entire life around Alex's needs and happiness. Every decision, every sacrifice had been made with him in mind. What would it mean to finally put myself first? At home, I found 3 missed calls from Alex on my landline. No messages. Probably calling to see if I'd made it home safely after leaving the dinner early. A token gesture of concern that wouldn't require any real conversation about what had happened. I ignored the calls and went to my small study. Inside, a locked cabinet was a box containing items I hadn't looked at in years, my original research notes on the cardiac valve, my surgical awards, and photographs from my days at Johns Hopkins. At the bottom was a framed news article from a medical journal, announcing the groundbreaking potential of the Winters-Hoffman valve design. The woman in that photograph looked confident, brilliant, accomplished. Nothing like the failure Alex had toasted last night. My phone rang again. Alex's number. I let it go to voicemail. This time, he left a message. "Grandma, just checking in. You left without saying goodbye last night. Call me back when you can." His voice sounded normal, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't publicly humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. There was no acknowledgement, no apology, just the expectation that I would continue in my role as the supportive grandmother, willing to overlook any slight, but not this time. This time, I would not make excuses for him. This time, there would be consequences. I picked up the phone and called my second contact, Dr. Jamila Patel, my former research partner who now headed cardiac innovation at a major medical device company. "Virginia," she exclaimed when I identified myself. "What a wonderful surprise." "Hello, Jamila. I'm calling about the Winters-Hoffman valve design. I think it's time to revisit it." There was a moment of silence. Then Jamila's voice, excited, but cautious. "After all these years? Virginia, that would be extraordinary. But why now?" I looked at the photograph of my younger self, remembered the passion and purpose that had once defined me before I set it all aside for Alex. "Because," I said with quiet determination, "it's long overdue." 3 weeks passed before Gerald's office sent the certified letter to Alex. During that time, I immersed myself in work I hadn't done in years. Jamila had been enthusiastic about reviving the valve project, arranging for me to consult with her research team. For the first time in over a decade, I was using my medical expertise for something beyond routine telehealth consultations. "Your design was ahead of its time," Jamila told me during our first video conference. "With modern materials and manufacturing techniques, we could bring this to market within 2 years." I spent my days reviewing updated cardiac research, refining my old designs, and consulting with engineers. The work energized me, awakening a part of myself I'd nearly forgotten. Alex called several times, but I kept our conversations brief and practical. I didn't mention the graduation dinner, and surprisingly, neither did he. It was as if the incident had never happened, a familiar pattern in our relationship. Unpleasant truths were ignored, brushed aside, never to be acknowledged. Until the letter arrived. I was reviewing research papers when my doorbell rang. Alex stood on my porch, his face flushed, a crumpled envelope clutched in his hand. Without waiting for an invitation, he pushed past me into the living room. "What is this?" he demanded, waving the letter. "Some kind of joke?" I closed the door calmly and turned to face him. "It's not a joke, Alex. You're cutting me out of your will because of a stupid toast?" His voice rose with each word. "I was just trying to be funny. Everyone makes graduation jokes." I observed him, this tall, handsome young man I'd raised from boyhood. His medical school regalia was replaced by an expensive watch and designer clothes that Caroline had likely purchased. He looked like a stranger. That toast was not the cause, Alex. It was merely the final confirmation of something I've been refusing to see for years. He paced the small living room, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane. You're overreacting. And what's this about a medical patent? You don't have any patents." "Actually, I do. The Winters-Hoffman cardiac valve. I designed it before you came to live with me." He stopped pacing, confusion replacing anger. "What are you talking about? You were just a regular doctor." The dismissive tone stung, but I kept my voice steady. "I was one of the leading cardiac researchers at Johns Hopkins, Alex. I had published in major medical journals by the time I was 35. The valve design was revolutionary. Minimally invasive, longer lasting than anything on the market." Alex's brow furrowed. "But if it was so important, why didn't you pursue it?" "Because my son and his wife died, and their 7-year-old boy needed me more than the medical community needed my research." He blinked, processing this. "But you never told me." Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. Or would you have seen it as just another example of my failure? His eyes dropped to the letter in his hand. There's more here. About Mom. Something about a letter she wrote? I gestured to the couch. You should sit down for this part, Alex. Reluctantly, he sat, unfolding the papers to read further. I watched his expression change as he reached the section about Elizabeth's letter, saw the color drain from his face. This can't be true, he whispered. Mom wouldn't. She loved Dad. She loved me. I sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance. Elizabeth was a complicated woman, Alex. She struggled with depression most of her adult life. Motherhood was overwhelming for her. But Aunt Caroline always said, Caroline created a myth, I interrupted gently. She turned her sister into someone she never was. Alex's hands trembled as he held the papers. Where's this letter? I want to see it. I retrieved the sealed envelope from my desk drawer and handed it to him. He stared at it for a long moment, as if afraid to break the seal. It's her handwriting, he said softly, tracing the elegant script that spelled out David's name. Yes, with shaking fingers, he opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. I watched his eyes move across the page, saw the exact moment when the carefully constructed image of his mother began to crumble. David, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've taken the job offer in Seattle. Don't try to follow me or change my mind. This isn't a spontaneous decision. I've been planning this for months. I'm not meant for this life. The constant demands, the endless responsibilities of being a wife and mother, it's suffocating me. I look at my life and don't recognize myself anymore. Where is the woman who was going to travel the world? Who was going to make her mark? Instead, I'm trapped in this endless cycle of PTA meetings and Alex's soccer practices. I know you'll say I'm being selfish. Maybe I am. But staying would be worse for everyone. I'm not the mother Alex deserves. He'll be better off with you and your mother. Virginia has always been more maternal than I could ever be. Please don't hate me. This isn't about you, or even about Alex. It's about me needing to find myself again, without the burden of family holding me back. Elizabeth Alex read the letter twice, then looked up at me with eyes swimming in tears. She was going to leave us? Nodded gently. She was planning to move the weekend after. I didn't need to finish the sentence, after the accident. But why didn't you tell me? His voice cracked. All these years you let me believe you were a child who had lost both parents, Alex. What good would it have done to tell you your mother was planning to abandon you days before she died? Alex stood abruptly, moving to the window. His back. To me, shoulders rigid, he asked, Did Dad know? About the letter? No. I found it when I was cleaning out their house after the funeral. It was in Elizabeth's desk, sealed, never delivered. He turned, his face a mask of confusion and hurt. And, Caroline, does she know about this? No. Elizabeth confided in me about her depression, but not about her plans to leave. Caroline and Elizabeth weren't as close as Caroline has led you to believe. They went months without speaking. Alex shook his head in disbelief. She always said they were best friends, that they told each other everything. Caroline has rewritten history to suit her narrative, Alex, just as she's rewritten my history to make me appear as a failure rather than someone who made a deliberate choice. He sank back onto the couch, staring at the letter in his hands. I don't understand. Why would Aunt Caroline lie to me all these years? I chose my words carefully. I think Caroline resented me from the beginning. She wanted custody of you, not out of love, but because you represented a connection to Elizabeth. When the court granted me guardianship, she found other ways to maintain control. By turning me against you, he said slowly, realization dawning. By creating a version of Elizabeth that never existed, and then encouraging you to live up to that impossible standard. By framing my choices as failures rather than sacrifices. Alex was quiet for a long time, his eyes fixed on the letter. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. The toast, what I said at graduation, was the culmination of years of Caroline's influence. I finished for him. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I'm sorry, Grandma, I didn't know about any of this. The apology, though sincere, felt inadequate against the years of dismissal and recent public humiliation. I didn't immediately respond. Alex glanced back at the legal notice. So you're really going forward with this? Cutting me out completely? The decision has been made, Alex. The patent rights are being reactivated, and the proceeds will go to medical research and scholarships for single parents. You'll need to make your own way now. But I'm starting my residency next month. I have student loans. You have your medical degree just as you wanted. You have the connections Caroline has cultivated for you. You have all the advantages I work to give you. He stared at me, a flicker of the entitled young man from the graduation. Dinner resurfacing. So that's it? One mistake and you throw away 15 years? I felt a sudden weariness. This isn't about punishment, Alex. It's about truth. The truth about your mother, the truth about my career, and the truth about choices and their consequences. He stood, stuffing the letter and legal documents back into the envelope. I need time to process all this. Of course. At the door, he paused. Aunt Caroline invited me to stay with her until my residency starts. She's already arranged everything. That's your choice, Alex. You're an adult now. He nodded stiffly and left without another word. I watched from the window as he got into his car and drove away, wondering if this would be the last time I saw my grandson. Later that evening, my phone rang. I expected it to be Alex, but the caller ID showed Caroline's number. I hesitated, then answered. How dare you? She hissed without preamble. After everything I've done for that boy, you try to turn him against me with lies? Hello, Caroline, I said calmly. I see Alex has spoken to you. You had no right to show him that letter. No right to tarnish Elizabeth's memory. It was Elizabeth's letter, Caroline. Her words, not mine. There was a moment of silence, then. You've always been jealous of me, of my relationship with Alex. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Jealous? I raised him, Caroline. I was there for every fever, every nightmare, every triumph and disappointment. And now you're punishing him because he's finally seeing you for what you really are, a bitter old woman who gave up on her own potential. This time I did laugh, a short, genuine sound that seemed to startle her into silence. Oh, Caroline, I said. You've never understood, have you? I didn't give up on anything. I made a choice to put someone else's needs before my own. That's not failure. That's love. I ended the call before she could respond and turned off my phone. Tomorrow I had an early video conference with Jamila's research team. The future of the Winters-Hoffman valve waited for no one, and neither would I. 2 months passed with no word from Alex. I threw myself into the valve project, spending hours on video calls with Jamila's team. The work sustained me, but in quiet moments, I wondered about Alex. Had I been too harsh? Then morning would come, and with it, renewed purpose. The valve project was progressing faster than anticipated. We're ready for initial clinical trials, Jamila announced. Virginia, this could be on the market within 18 months. Then came the knock on my door on a rainy August evening. I opened it to find Alex standing on my porch, soaked from the downpour, dark circles under his eyes. May I come in? He asked, his voice hoarse. I stepped aside. When I returned with a towel, he was staring at my dining table, covered with technical drawings. You're really doing it, he said quietly. The valve project. He dried his hair half-heartedly. Aunt Caroline moved to Denver last week. She said she needed a fresh start. His laugh was hollow. She didn't invite me to come with her. What happened, Alex? He sank into a chair. After I showed her mom's letter, everything changed. At first, she tried to convince me it was a forgery. When I didn't believe that, she said Mom must have been having a breakdown. And you didn't accept that explanation. He shook his head. I couldn't. The letter was too raw, too honest. He looked up at me. I started asking questions about Mom that Caroline couldn't or wouldn't answer. Simple things like Mom's favorite book or what foods she couldn't stand. And that made you suspicious. It made me realize I didn't really know my mother at all. Not the real Elizabeth, just the perfect version Caroline created. I softened slightly. Your mother wasn't a monster, Alex. She was just human, complicated, flawed, struggling with her own demons. Like depression, he said. I nodded. Elizabeth had been battling depression since college. When she was pregnant with you, she had a particularly severe episode. I took a sabbatical from my research to stay with you all for the first few months after you were born. Alex looked startled. You did? Yes. There's a lot you never knew, Alex. I tried to protect you from difficult truths. He explained how, after confronting Caroline, she got defensive, then angry. She accused me of betraying her, of choosing you over her. And that's when she left for Denver? Not immediately. First, he hesitated, shame crossing his features. She cut me off financially. The apartment she'd arranged for me during residency. She'd been paying the rent, the credit card I've been using since college, her account. Caroline has always been skilled at creating dependencies. Alex nodded. I've been staying with a classmate. My residency stipend barely covers food and basic expenses. He looked up, his expression both humble and desperate. I know I have no right to ask, especially after everything, but I need help, Grandma. I studied him. Was this genuine remorse or simply practical necessity now that Caroline had abandoned him? Help, I repeated. What kind of help, Alex? Financial help, at least until I get on my feet. Maybe a place to stay for a while. The decisions about the will and patent are final, I interrupted. The paperwork has been filed. His face fell. I understand. Do you? I asked. Do you really understand what happened, Alex? Not just with the toast or the letter, but the years before that? I retrieved a thick folder from my desk and placed it in front of him. What's this? He asked. The truth. All of it. Inside were documents spanning 15 years, bank statements showing the liquidation of my assets to pay for his education, medical reports detailing treatments I had postponed to cover his expenses, correspondence with Johns Hopkins about my resignation from research positions. There were also photographs showing the reality of our life together. I had no idea, he whispered. No, you didn't, because I never wanted you to feel like a burden. He stopped at a particular document, a letter from a prestigious research institute offering me a position. My polite refusal was attached. You turned this down because of me? Because I made a promise to be there for you, Alex. Always. He continued through the folder, stopping at emails between Caroline and myself. In them, she criticized my parenting, my career choices, my very existence in Alex's life. She really hated you, Alex said, looking up in shock. Caroline resented me because I had what she wanted, custody of you, and a connection to Elizabeth that she could never replicate. The last item in the folder was a USB drive with home videos. I set up my laptop, and we sat side by side as the first video began to play. It showed a family picnic, David at the grill, Elizabeth looking distracted, and 5-year-old Alex running with a toy airplane. Mom looks so sad, Alex observed. It was one of her difficult periods, I explained. She tried, Alex. In her own way, she did love you. We watched more videos. The real Elizabeth, not Caroline's mythical version, slowly emerged. Then came the videos from after the accident, showing our life together. Imperfect, sometimes. Difficult, but real. The final video showed Alex receiving his acceptance letter to Princeton. His hands shook as he opened the envelope, and when he read the acceptance, he looked up with pure happiness. Grandma, I got in, he shouted, jumping. To hug me, nearly knocking the camera over. You were proud of me, Alex said softly as the video ended. I've always been proud of you, Alex, even when you broke my heart. He closed the laptop. I was horrible to you. You were influenced by Caroline, yes, but you also made your own choices. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I looked at this young man, my grandson, but also a stranger in many ways, and felt the weight of our shared history. The hurt was still there, but alongside it was something else, hope. I don't know either, Alex, I said honestly, but perhaps we can start by acknowledging the truth, all of it, the good and the painful. Outside, the rain had stopped. A sliver of evening sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the room. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. A year can change everything. The seasons turned, the valve project progressed, and Alex and I began the slow work of rebuilding what had been broken. I didn't let him move in that rainy night. Instead, I gave him a check, enough to cover 3 months' rent near his hospital. This isn't a reconciliation gift, I told him. It's a beginning. What happens next depends on your actions, not your words. Thank you, Grandma. I'll pay you back. Yes, I said. You will. We established a cautious routine. Sunday dinners at my house, where conversation was stilted at first, but gradually eased into something genuine. Alex would arrive tired from hospital shifts, but always on time, often bringing small contributions. Bread, flowers, once a book on cardiac surgery. I read about your valve design, he said one evening. One of my attendings mentioned it in grand rounds. She called it groundbreaking. The first clinical trials are going well. You never lost your touch, he said quietly. All those years you were still a brilliant surgeon, even if you weren't practicing. By winter, our relationship had evolved into something new, not the uncomplicated bond of his childhood, nor the tension-filled dynamic of recent years, but something more balanced. In early spring, Jamila called with news. The FDA had fast-tracked approval for the Winters-Hoffmann valve. "We're looking at full approval by summer," she said. "Thousands of patients will benefit from your design." That evening, I shared the news with Alex and invited him to the formal press conference. His face lit up with genuine pride. "Really? You want me there?" "Yes," I said simply. "I do." The day of the press conference arrived bright and clear. Alex sat in the front row as I addressed the medical community. "The Winters-Hoffmann cardiac valve represents not just a medical advancement," I said, "but a personal journey. This design began over 15 years ago, before life took me in another direction. That detour wasn't a failure, it was a choice, one I would make again." I announced that all profits would fund research grants for underserved communities and scholarships for single parents pursuing medical careers. Later, Alex found me at the reception. "I'm requesting a transfer to the rural medicine program," he said. This surprised me. Rural medicine? That's quite a change. They need doctors who are committed to the community, not just building their resumes. I want to do work that matters. I recognized in his words something I had once felt, the pull toward meaningful work rather than prestigious titles. Summer brought final approval for the valve and an offer from Johns Hopkins, a visiting professorship. The position would allow me to teach while continuing to consult on the valve project. The night before my first lecture, Alex called. "I've been thinking about that toast at my graduation," he said. "I said you taught me what failure looks like. I was wrong. What you taught me was what courage looks like, what love looks like, what strength looks like." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of those words, the hurt they had once caused, and the healing they now offered. The next morning, I walked into the lecture hall, where decades earlier I had begun my medical career. In the back row sat Alex, who had taken the day off from his residency to be there. As we walked across campus afterward, he asked, "Would you do it again? Knowing everything, how it would turn out, what it would cost you, would you still make the same choice?" I looked at this young man who had once broken my heart with careless words, who was now trying to understand the nature of love and sacrifice. The answer came without hesitation. "Yes," I said, in a heartbeat. And in that moment, watching understanding dawn in his eyes, I knew that this, not the valve design, not the professorship, not the recognition, was my true legacy. This moment of connection, of seeing and being seen. Some lessons can only be taught through living. Some gratitude can only be earned through time.